The previous lesson has already introduced us to the French economy as it was prevalent during the old regime. In this lesson, we will be focusing on few other aspects of the French economy, and this lesson will help us understand how the depletion of the French economy was a very important reason behind the outbreak of the French Revolution. So let us now begin this lesson on the French economy during the old regime. Now, I am sure most of you are very fond of watching cartoons because cartoons look so interesting and fascinating to most of you. Well, what you see here is also a cartoon, but this is not for comic effect. What you see here instead is a political cartoon. So let us now focus on this cartoon for a while and try to understand what this cartoon stands for and what it is trying to tell us. Here you can see a huge block of stone on which two people are standing. Now this first person who is wearing a blue robe seems like a priest. And in fact, the book that he is holding resembles the Bible. So from this you can understand that this is a priest. Now if we are to analyze this cartoon with regard to the French societal setup during the old regime, we will be able to understand that this person stands for the clergy. While on the other hand, this other person tells you that he is a person of important rank and position in the society. In fact, you can see that he is holding a sword, which means that he can defend himself if need be. Now, by analyzing this cartoon in terms of the French societal setup, we can understand that this person belongs to the royalty, or the nobility. So from this we can understand that these two persons comprise the first and the second estates of the French society. While on the other hand, you can see that one person is being squeezed to death under this huge block of stone. Can you understand anything of this person apart from the fact that he is almost being smothered to death? He does not have a say. He is being oppressed and he is being tortured by these two people who seem heedless of the oppression meted out to this person. And by the attire that this person is wearing, we can understand that he belongs to either the peasantry or among the workers. So this person is a member of the third estate of the French society. Now, if you look closely at this cartoon, you will be able to see that something has been engraved on this huge block of stone. Can you read what is written on it? On it is written, tail import a curve, which means heavy taxes and unpaid labor. Now this engraving is very symbolic in the sense that heavy taxes and unpaid labor are things that are oppressing this member of the third estate. So just by looking at this one political cartoon, we are able to understand how the members of the first two estates were exploiting and torturing and oppressing this member of the third estate. Well, this unequal treatment towards the members of the third estate was something that filled the French society during the old regime. Well, during the old regime, when the members of the first two estates were amassing more and more wealth by exploiting and oppressing the members of the third estate, the members of the third estate were reeling under the repercussions of overgrowing population and poverty. This is because the population of France grew from 23 million in 1715 to 28 million in 1789. Now, in our previous lessons, we have discussed how it was the third estate that constituted the biggest amount of population in the French society. And when we see that the population of France was growing as a whole, we are able to understand that it was mostly the third estate that was growing in number. And with the growing population, a very important thing that needed to be taken care of is food. This is because as more and more humans were taking birth, more and more food was also required to feed and nourish the population. But after a while, the French kingdom failed to sustain the population because of failing to meet the growing demands of food. Because it was not able to grow as many food grains, as many food crops as were required to feed the growing population. And along with that, this failure to meet the demands of more and more food was accentuated by droughts, harsh winters. The winter of 1789 was very bitter in France, and because of that, the crops were all spoiled and destroyed. And because of the failure of crops, now there was food shortage in the French society. Now, the members of the first two estates were already rich and very resourceful, which is why it was easier for them to procure food grains and different other food items. But on the other hand, it were the peasants who were the worst hit by the failure of crops. And because of the failure of crops, there was also a shortage of food. The price of different food items like bread and sugar reached an exorbitantly high rate. And these poor peasants, workers were finding it very difficult to afford those food items. Which is why it now became a continual crisis of hunger and shortage in the French society just prior to the outbreak of the French Revolution. Now let me ask you a question before proceeding with this lesson and finding out how the failure of crops led to a very big stress and strain on the French economy. Drought and the harsh winter of 1789 caused food shortages in the French Empire. Do you think this statement is true or false? Well, this statement is true because we have learned that the winter of 1789 was very harsh and bitter. And it was because of this harsh and bitter winter that food crops failed. And because of the failure of food crops, the French society was now suffering from acute food shortages and expensive food items. Now, during this old regime, something that was quite prevalent in the French society was a subsistence crisis. Now, what do we mean by a subsistence crisis? Well, a subsistence crisis is a situation in which the basic amenities, the basic commodities that are required for survival become very difficult to be found. And subsistence crises were very prevalent in the French society prior to the French Revolution. This is because firstly, misgovernance was a very important reason that contributed to subsistence crisis. Because the monarchy was spending huge amounts of resources and wealth to ensure a very lavish and extravagant lifestyle. And along with that, the first and the second estates had no intention of taking care of the demands of the third estate. Which is why subsistence crisis came up time and again in the French society. Now, this subsistence crisis happens over a long process. Let us now closely look at the chain of events that together make up this condition called a subsistence crisis. Firstly, we begin with bad harvest. We have learned how harsh winters or even droughts contributed to bad harvests. And when bad harvests took place, the farmers and the peasants were no longer able to meet the growing demands. This is because the population of the French society was growing. More and more people required more and more amounts of food to consume. And when bad harvest took place, it was immediately followed by scarcity of grains. Because owing to bad harvest, food crops failed. There was a scarcity of different kinds of grains which were required for the production of food. Now, after the scarcity of grains came rising food prices. Now, we have learned that because of the growing population, more and more food was required. And when the society failed to meet the growing demands, the prices of the food that were available at that point of time started rising very high. In fact, the prices of very basic food items like bread, sugar, tobacco reached exorbitantly high rates. And when food items became very pricey, the poorest could no longer afford to buy those food items. Because we have learned that it were the poor peasants, workers, artisans who constituted the huge and biggest bulk of the French population. And when the scarcity of grains was followed by rising food prices, these poor people could no longer afford to buy themselves even a loaf of bread. But food is something without which human beings, or for that matter any life, cannot survive. If I tell you to spend a day or two without having any food, you will not be able to do so, because food gives us the energy that we need to live, to exist. And because of this inability to afford food, now came food riots. Because when these people who were already hungry, who were already very poor, could no longer buy even a loaf of bread, they now broke out into riots. In front of the bakeries, many people queued. And when they saw that the prices of bread and other food items were very, very high, they were now breaking out in rebellion. They were rioting amongst themselves because they could no longer be hungry and continue to exist. They wanted food. They wanted to sustain themselves. Now, these food riots eventually led to very bad repercussions within the French society that we will come to discussing in a while. Now, this inability to afford food also resulted in weaker bodies. As we mentioned that food is something without which we cannot sustain ourselves. Food gives us the energy that we need to work, to write, to think, to work, and in one word, to exist and live. And when these people who were not being able to get any food for themselves, their bodies were becoming very weak. So this inability to buy and afford food items now resulted in malnourishment in a huge section of the French population. Now, these food riots often became very violent, because when people are pushed to the edge, when people are pushed to the brink and they are starving, they are hungry, they will be very infuriated and angered. They will no longer be going out in peaceful ways. They will be very violent, and because of these violent food riots, many people died. Because there used to be bloodshed and a lot of violence outside the bakeries. Can you imagine the plight of these people who lived in the most deplorable conditions in the French society prior to the outbreak of the French Revolution? We cannot even think of dying just in the process of getting ourselves food. All that these people were doing was to get food for themselves and their families, and in the process of that, they lost their lives. Now, weaker bodies also gave birth to diseases and epidemics. Now, when someone's body becomes very weak and malnourished, that person becomes very vulnerable to catching different kinds of illnesses and diseases. And these diseases also eventually led to epidemics in the French society. So can you understand how from this bad harvest a chain of events kept on following, and this gave birth to many epidemics in the French society. People were already starving and they were now having to fight the epidemics. And these epidemics also resulted in increased number of deaths, because epidemics are something to which a lot of people lose their lives. And such was the thing that was happening in the French society as well during the old regime. Now mind you, during the old regime it wasn't just one or two subsistence crises that took place. Many subsistence crises took place over the years because of misgovernance, because of exploitation and oppression of the third estate, and because of bad harvest and scarcity of food grains. So this is the course that a subsistence crisis takes, and it absolutely ravages and leaves the societies completely devastated. So in this lesson we could understand how the members of the third estate were exploited and oppressed by the monarchy and the first two estates. Now we have also learned that these people were infuriated and angered because they could no longer restrain themselves. They could no longer prevent themselves from breaking out into riots and rebellions. Because no one can continue to be hungry and starving and fighting epidemics and still stay peaceful. So this lesson helped us understand how the French economy was being absolutely ravaged and depleted, and how these were the factors that contributed to anger and vengeance in the minds of the members of the third estate. In our subsequent lesson, we will learn how within the third estate itself a section came into being, a section that was educated, literate and affluent. And we will also learn how that one section of individuals played a major role in the outbreak of the French Revolution. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers, or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million+ questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.